The clock on David's dashboard showed 2:17 a.m. as he drove down the empty highway, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tight. Another job interview, another polite rejection. "We'll keep your resume on file," they had said, which everyone knew meant thanks but no thanks. At 34 years old, he never thought he'd be driving home at this hour from his third failed interview this week, wondering how he was going to explain to his 8-year-old daughter Sophie why Daddy couldn't buy her the new shoes she needed for school. The factory job he'd worked for 7 years was gone. Budget cuts, they called it. David called it his worst nightmare coming true. 2 years ago, when his wife packed her bags and left, she'd looked him straight in the eye and said he'd never amount to anything. Back then, he had a steady paycheck and could prove her wrong. Now, sitting in his beat-up Honda with the check engine light that had been on for 3 months, he was starting to wonder if she'd been right all along. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Sophie's asleep. Don't wake her when you get here. We need to talk tomorrow." David's stomach dropped. His mom had been watching Sophie more and more lately, and he could see the worry in her eyes every time he dropped his daughter off. She was too polite to say it, but David knew what she was thinking. Maybe Sophie would be better off living with her grandmother full-time. Maybe he really was failing as a father. David rubbed his tired eyes as he took the exit toward Riverside. The interview had been at a call center an hour away from home, the kind of place where they hired anyone desperate enough to work night shifts for minimum wage. Even they had turned him down. "We're looking for someone with more recent customer service experience," the manager had said, not bothering to look up from his clipboard. David wanted to tell him that he'd been serving customers his whole life, that he'd worked in retail through high school and college, that he knew how to talk to people and solve their problems. But what was the point? As he drove across the Riverside Overpass, David found himself thinking about Sophie's last school play. She'd been a sunflower in the garden scene, standing there in her yellow costume that his mom had sewn together from old fabric. After the show, Sophie had run up to him with the biggest smile on her face. "Did you see me, Daddy? Did you see me shine?" she'd asked. David had picked her up and spun her around, telling her she was the most beautiful sunflower in the whole world. But even in that moment, he'd noticed the other parents around them, with their nice cameras and expensive clothes, and he'd felt like everyone could see right through him to the scared. Broke man he really was, that's when he saw her. At first, David thought his tired eyes were playing tricks on him. There was someone standing by the railing of the bridge, and they were standing way too close to the edge. As he got closer, he could see it was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, with long dark hair that was moving in the wind. She was wearing jeans and a light jacket, and her hands were gripping the metal railing so tight her knuckles looked white even from a distance. David's first instinct was to keep driving. He was tired, emotionally drained, and dealing with his own problems. What could he possibly say to help someone else when he couldn't even help himself? Besides, maybe she was just looking at the view. The Riverside area was pretty at night, with all the city lights reflected in the water below. But something made him look again. The way she was standing, the way she was leaning forward, the fact that she was completely alone on a bridge at 2 in the morning. David had felt that kind of desperation before. Not the physical kind, but the emotional weight that makes you feel like you're drowning even when you're standing on solid ground. Just last month, after another rejection letter and another argument with his ex-wife about child support he couldn't afford, David had sat in his car in an empty parking lot and wondered what would happen if he just disappeared. Would anyone really miss him? Would Sophie be better off without a father who couldn't provide for her? The thought had scared him so much that he'd driven straight to his mom's house just to hold his daughter and remind himself why he had to keep trying. Now, looking at this stranger on the bridge, David felt that same fear all over again. But this time it wasn't for himself. He pulled his car over to the side of the road and sat there for a moment, engine running, hazard lights blinking. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe she was fine. Maybe he'd just embarrass himself and her by assuming the worst. But what if he was right? What if he drove away and something terrible happened? How would he live with himself knowing he could have tried to help? David turned off the engine and stepped out of his car. The night air was cool and carried the sound of water flowing far below the bridge. As he got closer, he could see the woman more clearly. She was young, probably around 22 or 23, with tears on her cheeks that caught the light from the street lamps. Her breathing was quick and shallow, like someone who was trying not to panic but failing. "Hey there," David called out softly. staying about 10 feet away so he wouldn't startle her. "I'm David, are you okay?" The woman turned her head slightly but didn't let go of the railing. "Please just go away," she said, her voice shaky but clear. "I don't need help." David's heart was beating fast, but he tried to keep his voice calm and steady. "I know this might sound weird, but I was actually hoping maybe you could help me. I'm having one of the worst nights of my life and I could really use someone to talk to." It wasn't entirely a lie. David was having one of the worst nights of his life and he did need someone to talk to. But more than that, he needed this young woman to step away from that railing and realize that whatever was happening in her world, there had to be another way through it. The woman looked at him with confusion and suspicion. "You want me to help you? I can't even help myself right now." David took a small step closer, moving slowly and keeping his hands visible. Sometimes talking to someone who understands what it feels like to be at rock bottom is exactly what we both need. "Would it be okay if I just sat down over here for a few minutes? You don't have to say anything if you don't want to." Without waiting for an answer, David walked over to the curb about 15 feet from where she was standing and sat down on the concrete. It wasn't comfortable, but it gave him a clear view of her without making her feel trapped or pressured. "You know what's funny?" David said, looking out at the city lights instead of directly at her. 2 hours ago, I was in the worst job interview of my life, and all I could think about was how I'm letting down the most important person in my world. My daughter. She's 8 years old and she thinks I'm some kind of superhero, but I can't even buy her new shoes without overdrawing my bank account." He paused, surprised by how easy it was to tell the truth to a complete stranger in the middle of the night. The young woman stayed quiet for a long time, but David noticed she had turned slightly so she could see him better. He kept talking, partly because he sensed she needed to hear another human voice, and partly because once he started sharing his truth, it felt impossible to stop. "Her name is Sophie," David continued, his voice getting softer, "and she has this way of looking at me like I can fix anything in the world. Last week her goldfish died and she brought it to me in this little bowl, crying her eyes out. She asked me if I could make it better. I had to explain that sometimes things die and we can't bring them back, but we can remember all the good times we had with them." He let out a small laugh that didn't sound very happy. "She accepted that better than I'm accepting my own failures right now. Kids are stronger than we think they are." "What's her favorite thing to do?" the woman asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. David felt a spark of hope. She was engaging, asking questions. That had to be a good sign. "She loves to paint," he said. And for the first time all night his voice had some warmth in it. Not just coloring books, but real painting with brushes and everything. "She creates these wild, colorful pictures that don't look like anything in the real world, but somehow they're perfect. Last month she painted what she called happiness soup, and it was just swirls of yellow and orange and pink all mixed together." The woman had loosened her grip on the railing just slightly. "That sounds beautiful." "It is," David said. "She hung it on the refrigerator, and every morning when I make her breakfast, I look at that painting and remember that there's still good stuff in the world, even when everything else feels broken." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. David could hear cars passing occasionally on the highway below, and somewhere in the distance a train was moving through the city. Normal sounds of life continuing even in the middle of the night. "I graduated college 3 months ago," the woman said suddenly. "Social work degree. I wanted to help families who were struggling, you know? Kids who needed someone to believe in them." David turned his head slightly toward her but didn't stare. "That's a good thing to want to do." "Yeah, well, turns out nobody wants to hire someone with no experience, even if they have all the passion in the world," she said, and David could hear the bitterness in her voice. "I've applied to 47 jobs in the last 3 months. 47. I keep a list in my notebook because my mom keeps asking me how the job search is going, and I wanted to have an exact number to give her." 47 rejections is brutal," David said. "Trust me, I know." "The worst part isn't even the rejections," she continued, and David could tell she was starting to let her guard down. "It's the debt. I owe $68,000 for a degree that apparently doesn't mean anything. My parents co-signed the loans because they believed in me, and now I can't even get a job at the grocery store because I'm overqualified." She made air quotes with one hand while still holding the railing with the other. "My parents keep saying it'll work out, that I just need to be patient. But every day that passes, I feel like more of a burden. They're already struggling to pay their own bills, and now they've got my student loans hanging over their heads too because I can't find work. David nodded slowly. That feeling of being a burden to the people you love most. That's the worst feeling in the world. Exactly, she said, turning to look at him directly for the first time. You get it, I do, David said. My mom has been watching Sophie more and more lately because I keep having to run to interviews and take on odd jobs. Last week I saw her buying Sophie school supplies, and I know she used money from her Social Security check. She didn't say anything, but I saw the receipt on her kitchen counter. My 8-year-old daughter is being supported by her 70-year-old grandmother because her dad can't get his act together. The woman stepped back from the railing slightly and leaned against it instead of gripping it so tightly. How do you keep going when everything feels so hopeless? David thought about that question seriously. Honestly, some days I don't know. Some days I sit in my car after Sophie goes to bed and I just cry. Really ugly crying, the kind where your whole body shakes and you can't breathe right. But then what? Then I remember that Sophie needs me to keep trying. Not because I'm perfect or because I have all the answers, but because giving up would hurt her more than struggling would hurt me. David paused and looked up at the stars, which were barely visible through the city lights. And sometimes, like tonight, I remember that there might be other people out there who need someone to not give up too. The woman was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. I've been volunteering at the community center while I look for work. Just to have something to do, you know? There's this one little girl who comes in with her grandmother sometimes. She's always so worried about everything, asking me if her daddy is sad and if there's anything she can do to help him feel better. David's chest tightened, but he didn't say anything. I told her that sometimes grown-ups go through hard times, but that doesn't mean it's her job to fix everything. I said the best thing she could do was keep being her wonderful self and keep loving her dad, because love is the strongest magic there is. That's beautiful advice, David said softly. I wish I could follow my own advice, she said with a sad laugh. It's easier to help other people see hope than it is to find it for yourself. What's your name? David asked gently. She hesitated for a moment. Lisa. Lisa, can I tell you something? In the past hour, you've helped me more than you know. Just by listening, just by understanding what it feels like to have everything falling apart. You might think you're not helping anyone right now, but you helped me tonight. Lisa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Really, really. And if you're volunteering at the community center, helping kids and families, then you're already doing exactly what you went to school for. You're already making a difference, even if it doesn't come with a paycheck yet. The paycheck part is kind of important, though, Lisa said, but there was less desperation in her voice now. It is, David agreed. But maybe we're both looking at this wrong. Maybe instead of focusing on all the doors that have closed, we need to start looking for the ones that might still open. Lisa pushed herself away from the railing completely and sat down on the curb a few feet away from David. I'm scared, she said simply. Me too, David said. But you know what? Scared people can still do brave things. Being here tonight, talking to a stranger, sharing your story, that's brave. Staying alive when everything hurts, that's brave too, Lisa said quietly. They sat together in the quiet night, two people who had found each other at exactly the moment they both needed to remember. They weren't alone in the world. As the first hints of dawn started to creep across the sky, David realized they had been talking for almost 2 hours. The conversation had moved from their struggles to their dreams, from their fears to the small moments that kept them going. Lisa had completely moved away from the railing now and was sitting cross-legged on the sidewalk, looking more like a college student taking a break between classes than someone who had been contemplating the worst just hours before. You know what's weird? Lisa said, picking at a loose thread on her jacket. I came out here tonight because I felt like nobody would miss me if I was gone. But talking to you, I'm starting to remember all the little ways I matter to people. David smiled, the first real smile he'd had in weeks. Tell me about those ways. Well, there's Mrs. Chen at the corner market. Every time I go in there, she asks about my job search and tells me about her grandson, who's also looking for work. She always slips an extra apple into my bag when she thinks I'm not looking. That's sweet. And my neighbor's cat, Mr. Whiskers, always comes running when he sees me coming up the stairs. His owner told me he only does that for people he really trusts. Lisa paused and looked out at the city below them. And then there are the kids at the community center. David's attention sharpened slightly, though he tried not to show it. Tell me more about that. I started volunteering there about 2 months ago just to have something to put on job applications, you know? But it turned into something more. These kids, they see you for who you really are. They don't care that you don't have a fancy job or that your clothes are from the thrift store. They care that you listen when they talk and that you remember their names. Lisa's voice got softer, more thoughtful. There's this art program on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Nothing fancy, just some brushes and paper and whatever paint we can afford. But these kids, they create the most amazing things. They paint their feelings, their dreams, their families. David felt his heart skip a beat. Sophie went to art programs at the community center. His mom had mentioned it several times, how much Sophie loved painting there, and how there was a nice young volunteer who always made sure Sophie felt included. What kind of things do they paint? David asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Oh, everything. Rainbows and monsters and their pets. One little girl always paints these incredible abstract pieces. She calls them things like happy soup and dancing colors. She's so creative and sweet, but I can tell she worries about things that kids her age shouldn't have to worry about. David's pulse quickened. Happy soup. Those were Sophie's exact words for her favorite painting style. But lots of kids probably said things like that, right? It had to be a coincidence. She sounds special, David managed to say. She is. She has this way of making everyone around her feel better, even when she's dealing with her own stuff. Last week, she spent the whole art session making a card for her dad because she said he looked tired and needed something to cheer him up. David's breath caught in his throat. Sophie had made him a card last week, a bright yellow and orange creation with "Best Daddy" written in her careful 8-year-old handwriting. She'd given it to him after another particularly hard day of job searching, and he'd nearly cried right there at the kitchen table. What? David had to clear his throat. What did the card look like? Lisa smiled, and her whole face lit up. Bright yellow and orange like sunshine. She drew a stick figure of her and her dad holding hands, and she wrote, "Best Daddy" in these big, colorful letters. She was so proud of it. She told me her dad keeps it on the refrigerator right next to her favorite painting. David felt the world tilt sideways. It couldn't be possible. The chances were too small, too incredible. But as Lisa continued talking, more details emerged that made denial impossible. She comes with her grandmother usually, this really sweet older lady who clearly adores her. The grandmother told me she's been watching her more lately because her son, the girl's dad, is going through a rough patch. Lost his job and is trying to find work. David's hands were shaking now. He pressed them against his knees to steady himself. The little girl worries about her dad a lot, Lisa continued, unaware of the bomb she was dropping. She asked me if I thought her daddy was sad because of something she did wrong. It broke my heart. I told her that sometimes grown-ups go through hard times that have nothing to do with their kids, and that the best thing she could do was keep loving him and being her amazing self. What else did you tell her? David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I told her that her daddy was lucky to have someone who loved him so much, and that even when things seem scary or difficult, families stick together and help each other through the tough times. She seemed to feel better after that. Lisa looked at David and noticed he had gone very quiet. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. David rubbed his face with both hands, trying to process what he was hearing. Lisa, this little girl you're talking about, what does she look like? She's got light brown hair that she usually wears in pigtails, and these big green eyes that just sparkle when she smiles. She's missing one of her front teeth, and she has this little scar on her chin from when she fell off her bike last year. Lisa paused, studying David's expression. Why do you ask? David looked at Lisa directly, his eyes wide with disbelief. Because I think you've been helping my daughter. The silence that followed was so complete that David could hear his own heartbeat. Lisa stared at him, her mouth slightly open, processing what he had just said. Your daughter? She whispered, Sophie. 8 years old, loves to paint, worries about her dad too much, calls her abstract paintings things like happy soup. David's voice was getting stronger now, more amazed than shocked. She's been coming home from the community center talking about Miss Lisa, the volunteer who listens to her and helps her with her art projects. Lisa's eyes filled with tears. But this time they weren't tears of despair. Sophie is your Sophie? She's been talking about you for weeks. How kind you are. How you always remember what she's working on. How you told her that it's okay to have big feelings and that art is a good way to express them. Oh my God. Lisa said, covering her face with her hands. This is impossible. This can't be real, but it was real. David pulled out his phone and scrolled through his photos until he found a recent picture of Sophie at the park, grinning at the camera with her missing tooth on full display, and her hair in the pigtails Lisa had described. Lisa looked at the photo and started crying again, but now she was also laughing. That's her. That's my Sophie. I can't believe. How is this possible? I don't know, David said, shaking his head in wonder. But Lisa, do you realize what this means? All those times you thought nobody would miss you. Sophie has been coming home and telling me about the wonderful volunteer who makes art time the best part of her week. Lisa stared at the photo on David's phone for a long time, touching the screen gently as if she could reach through it and hug Sophie. She drew me a picture 2 weeks ago, she said softly. It was a rainbow with 2 stick figures underneath it. She said one was her and one was me, and we were sharing an umbrella made of colors. She brought that home, David said, his voice full of amazement. She put it on her bedroom wall and told me it was a picture of her and her friend Miss Lisa, who helps her when she feels worried. The morning sun was getting brighter now, and the city was starting to wake up around them. A few early commuters were driving past, probably heading to jobs that David wished he had. But for the first time in months, he wasn't focused on what he didn't have. He was thinking about the impossible connection that had just been revealed. This changes everything, Lisa said, wiping her tears with her sleeve. All this time, I thought I wasn't making a difference in anyone's life. I thought I was just killing time until I could find a real job. But I've been helping your daughter through one of the hardest times in her life. And she's been helping you too, even if you didn't know it, David said. Every time you made her smile, every time you listened to her worries, you were giving her strength. And that strength came home with her, and helped me keep going on the days when I wanted to give up. Lisa stood up slowly, and looked out at the city below them. The view that had seemed so final and frightening just a few hours ago now looked different. The buildings weren't walls closing her in anymore. They were full of people like David and Sophie, people who needed what she had to offer. I want to see her again, Lisa said, but not at the community center where she might ask questions about why I look like I've been crying all night. David laughed, a real laugh that felt good in his chest. You want to know something funny? Today is Thursday. Sophie has art time at the community center at 3 o'clock. My mom usually takes her, but I was planning to pick her up early because I have another job interview tomorrow and wanted to spend some time with her. What if... Lisa started, then stopped herself. No, that's crazy. What? What if we went together? I mean, what if you brought Sophie to art time today and I was there like normal, and we just let it happen naturally? David thought about it. The idea seemed both perfectly simple and completely miraculous. You want to go back to volunteering today? After everything that's happened? Especially after everything that's happened, Lisa said firmly. David, 3 hours ago I thought my life was over. Now I'm realizing that I've been living a purpose-driven life this whole time without even knowing it. Sophie isn't just some random kid I help with art projects. She's the daughter of someone who risked his own safety to save a stranger. She's part of a story that's bigger than both of us. David felt a warm feeling spreading through his chest, something he hadn't felt since before he lost his job. It was hope, but not the desperate kind he'd been clinging to during job interviews. This was solid hope based on something real. Okay, he said. Let's do it. But Lisa, I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me that if you ever feel this desperate again, if you ever think about coming back to a bridge like this, you'll call me instead. Promise me you'll remember that there's at least one 8-year-old girl in this world who thinks you're amazing. Lisa nodded, fresh tears starting again. I promise. And you have to promise me something too. Name it. Promise me that you'll remember you're not failing as a father. Any man who stops his car at 2 a.m. to help a stranger is the kind of man who raises daughters who care about other people. Sophie is lucky to have you. They exchanged phone numbers as the city fully woke up around them. David offered to drive Lisa home so she could get cleaned up before the afternoon, but she said she wanted to walk and think about everything that had happened. They agreed to meet at the community center at 2:45, 15 minutes before Sophie's art time started. The rest of David's day passed in a strange, dreamlike state. He picked up Sophie from his mother's house and told her they were going to art time a little early today. Sophie's face lit up with excitement. Will Miss Lisa be there? Sophie asked as David helped her into her car seat. I think she will be, David said, trying to keep his voice casual. Good. I want to show her the picture I've been working on at home. It's a painting of all the people who make me happy, and she's in it. David's throat tightened. Who else is in the picture? You and Grandma and Mr. Whiskers from next door and Miss Lisa and my teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez. Oh, and I painted my goldfish in heaven with angel wings because I think he's probably happy up there. When they arrived at the community center, David's hands were shaking slightly as he helped Sophie out of the car. He couldn't quite believe this was really happening. Part of him worried that he had imagined the whole conversation on the bridge, that it had been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But then he saw Lisa walking toward the entrance from the other direction, and he knew it had all been real. She had changed clothes and pulled her hair back, and she looked like the professional, caring volunteer that Sophie had been describing for weeks. When she saw David and Sophie approaching, she smiled nervously and gave David a small wave. Miss Lisa. Sophie suddenly broke free from David's hand and ran toward Lisa with pure joy. Miss Lisa, you're here. I brought my daddy today. Lisa knelt down to Sophie's level, and David watched as his daughter threw her arms around the woman who had no idea she'd been saving both their lives, one art session at a time. Hi, sweetheart, Lisa said, hugging Sophie back. I'm so glad you're here, and it's wonderful to finally meet your daddy. Sophie stepped back and looked between David and Lisa with the serious expression she got when she was figuring something out. Daddy, this is Miss Lisa. She's the one I told you about who helps me paint my feelings. David walked over and extended his hand to Lisa, both of them trying to act like they were meeting for the first time. It's nice to meet you, Lisa. Sophie talks about you all the time. Your daughter is very special, Lisa said, shaking his hand. She brightens up the whole art room when she's here. Sophie beamed with pride, completely unaware that she had just participated in the most meaningful introduction of her young life. Walking into the community center felt different for David this time. Usually, when he dropped Sophie off for activities, he felt like he was marking time until he could pick her up again. Today, he felt like he was stepping into a place where his daughter had been building a second family that he knew nothing about. The art room was bright and cheerful, with children's paintings covering every wall. David recognized Sophie's style immediately in several of the displayed pieces. Bold, happy colors swirled together in ways that somehow made perfect sense even when they didn't look like anything specific. Look, Daddy. Sophie grabbed his hand and pulled him toward a corner display. These are all my paintings from the past month. David studied the collection, seeing Sophie's emotions played out in paint and paper. There were dark, stormy pieces from the days when she'd overheard him on the phone with bill collectors. There were bright, sunshine paintings from good days when they'd played in the park. And there, in the center, was a painting that made David's breath catch in his throat. It showed two stick figures, one tall, one small, holding hands under a sky full of stars. Above them, in Sophie's careful letters, she had written, "Me and Daddy are brave together." When did you paint this one? David asked softly. Last week after you told me about my goldfish going to heaven, Sophie said. Miss Lisa helped me think of what to write. She said that people and families help each other be brave, even when things are scary. David looked across the room where Lisa was setting up paint supplies for the afternoon session. She caught his eye and smiled, and David realized that she had been helping Sophie process her fears about her father's struggles without even knowing who her father was. Can I help with art time today? David asked Sophie. I don't have anywhere else to be right now. Really? You want to stay and paint? Sophie's eyes got so wide and happy that David wondered why he'd never thought to ask before. If Miss Lisa doesn't mind an extra helper, David said. Lisa overheard and walked over with an armload of paintbrushes. We always need more hands, she said to David, then knelt down to Sophie's level. What do you think, Sophie? Should we let your daddy help us today? Yes, and I know exactly what we should all paint together. Sophie bounced on her toes with excitement. Over the next hour, David watched Lisa work with the dozen kids who showed up for art time. She remembered each child's name, knew what projects they were working on, and had a way of asking questions that helped them think through their feelings. When one little boy got frustrated because his painting didn't look the way he wanted, Lisa sat with him and helped him see the beauty in what he'd accidentally created. Sometimes the best art happens when we stop trying so hard to control everything, she told the boy. Sometimes we have to let the paint do what it wants to do. David found himself thinking that Lisa's advice applied to more than just painting. Sophie had convinced David and Lisa to work on a collaborative painting with her, something she called a family tree of feelings. Each of them painted different sections, and somehow their individual styles blended together into something that was bigger and more beautiful than any of them could have created alone. "This is my favorite art day ever," Sophie announced as she added finishing touches to her section. "Because all my favorite people are here painting together." After art time ended and the other children had been picked up, the three of them stayed to clean up. Sophie chattered happily about her painting plans for next week, while David and Lisa wiped down tables and put away supplies. "Can Miss Lisa come have dinner with us tonight?" Sophie asked suddenly. "Grandma's making spaghetti and she always makes too much." David and Lisa looked at each other over Sophie's head. In the past few hours, they had gone from strangers to conspirators to something that felt almost like family. The idea of Lisa joining them for dinner felt both completely natural and slightly overwhelming. "I don't want to intrude," Lisa said carefully. "Please," Sophie asked, looking up at Lisa with those big green eyes. "I want to show you my room and all my paintings at home too." "Only if you're sure," Lisa said to David. David realized that he was sure. More sure than he'd been about anything in months. "My mom would love to meet the person who's been making Sophie so happy. And honestly, after today I think we're all part of each other's story now." Dinner at David's mother's house was one of those perfect evenings that happen unexpectedly. Sophie gave Lisa the full tour of the house, including her bedroom gallery of paintings and the refrigerator display in the kitchen. David's mother, Ruth, instantly adored Lisa and spent the whole meal asking about her background and her plans. "You studied social work?" Ruth asked as she served seconds of spaghetti. "That's exactly what this community needs more of." "I've been having trouble finding a paying position," Lisa admitted. "But working with the kids at the community center has reminded me why I wanted to do this work in the first place." "Have you talked to the center director about a full-time position?" Ruth asked. "They've been trying to expand their family support services for months." David watched Lisa's face light up with possibility. "I hadn't thought to ask. I assumed they couldn't afford to hire anyone new." "Sometimes you have to ask for what you want," Ruth said, patting Lisa's hand. "The worst they can say is not yet." After dinner, while Sophie was showing Lisa her collection of art supplies, David's phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize, but something made him answer it. "Mr. Williams, this is Janet from Riverside Manufacturing. We interviewed you yesterday for the production supervisor position." David's heart sank. Here came another polite rejection. "I know we said we'd call next week, but I wanted to reach out sooner. We were very impressed with your interview, and we'd like to offer you the position. The salary is $42,000 a year, with health benefits starting after 90 days. David nearly dropped the phone. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" "We're offering you the job, Mr. Williams. Can you start Monday?" David said yes so quickly that Janet laughed. After he hung up, he stood in the kitchen for a moment, hardly believing what had just happened. From the living room, he could hear Sophie and Lisa talking about color theory and artistic expression. And he realized that everything, the sleepless nights, the rejections, even the moment on the bridge had led to this. 6 months later, David was settled into his new job and feeling more confident than he had in years. Lisa had indeed gotten hired full-time at the community center and was developing programs to help families in crisis. Sophie was thriving, splitting her time between her dad's place and her grandmother's, secure in the knowledge that she was surrounded by people who loved her. But the most important change was harder to put into words. David had learned that sometimes the people who need saving are the ones already saving others. Lisa had discovered that her value wasn't measured by her job title or her bank account, but by the lives she touched every day. And Sophie, without ever knowing the full story, had learned that families come in all shapes and sizes, and that sometimes the most important people in your life are the ones who show up when you need them most. The painting they had created together, that first Thursday, still hung in Sophie's room, a reminder that beautiful things can emerge from broken pieces, and that sometimes the best art happens when you stop trying to control everything and trust the process to reveal what was always meant to be.